Hello, my name is Hannah Duff, and today I'll be talking about the invasion potential of a Western U.S. introduced annual plant and our prediction that it will increase with climate change. So I'll start by talking a bit about the species annual wheatgrass and what we know about it, as well as go over the methods we used in the field to observe its life cycle and use these observations to parameterize a life cycle model which we use to predict its invasion potential in the future. And then I'll go over future research surrounding prescribed burns in the research area. Annual wheatgrass is an introduced winter annual that originated in Europe. It grows well at elevations below 1,600 meters and with annual precipitation less than 25 centimeters. You can see here on the left that it's introduced into 12 US states. However, though it's widespread, there's very little published literature about this plant, and especially about its life cycle and its reproductive capability. But you can see in the photo on the top left that the spikelets of annual wheatgrass tend to detach as a whole and fall into a thick mat wherever it grows. And we have found that these spikelets are capable of germinating even after multiple years in the seed bank. So in order to understand a bit more about this plant, at the beginning of our study, we did a seed depth and emergence study. You can see that we used different treatments of depth, and we found that annual wheatgrass can still emerge up to 5 centimeters deep. This would signal that it's a fairly competitive winter annual. So we were first introduced to this plant by the Yellowstone Park Management. And in an area of the Gardner Basin, they've been very concerned that annual wheatgrass is preventing establishment of other natives. And their concern is warranted because you can see here on this graph that our average minimum winter temps are increasing in the Gardner Basin. This would reduce winter grass mortality and make annual wheatgrass even more competitive as time goes on. As well as our projected future temperatures, we're expecting them to increase in this area, meaning annual wheatgrass will be more competitive by having a longer period of time to complete its life cycle with these warmer springs and falls. So we know from prior research that C3 plants are predicted to increase in productivity with increased CO2. However, we see that C3 plants have inconsistent responses to rising temperatures. So our question remains, will annual wheatgrass populations increase in response to warming temperatures and elevated CO2? So to begin our study, we did a greenhouse study in a growth chamber, and we grew annual wheatgrass at 2 treatments. Here on the left, annual wheatgrass was grown with 700 parts per million CO2, and there on the right with 400, which is an ambient level. We found that at elevated CO2, annual wheatgrass was much taller. You can see there's a significant difference between these plant heights, as well as in their growth rates. And so while we found a significant difference between the plant heights with the 2 treatments, we did not find a significant difference in their biomass. So what we really want to know is how this translates to the field. So a common method for studying increased temperature and CO2 in the field is to use open-top chambers. You can see here on the left, this is just a plastic ring that will increase the temperature within it about 2 degrees Celsius. So we placed these in the field in the Gardner Basin, and we studied how the plants changed within it versus to this ambient frame on the right. So what we looked at over time is first the life cycle stage of emergence for annual wheatgrass, as well as how many of these seedlings survive, how many spikelets they produce, how the seed rain functions, and also the seed survival in the seed bank. And you'll note we have both a fall and a spring seed bank for this winter annual. And here are pictures of where we first found annual wheatgrass germinating in the fall of 2019. And now we've observed it in the spring as well. So our study area is in the Gardner Basin. Here on this map on the left, you can see that Gardner is located in the northern edge of Yellowstone National Park. It's at a very low elevation and it receives very little rainfall, which make it ideal growing conditions for annual wheatgrass. And you can see here on the right that there are multiple exclosures that were built by the park, by Yellowstone, in order to reduce grazing pressure on some of these native plants in the area. So all of this area around the Gardner Basin was settled in the 1870s for agricultural purposes. And then the park reclaimed it in the 1930s, and they've been working to restore it ever since because it's a vital grazing area for a lot of mammals in the park. And so these ongoing restoration efforts have been hindered by the presence of annual wheatgrass. So what we did to study its presence here is we placed a 100-meter transect within this grazing exclosure, and we placed 40 vegetative monitoring frames within it, which were all placed using adaptive sampling methods. And here in this study, we're focusing on our treatments A and B, where A is a frame within the open top chamber and B is one at ambient conditions. Then in each of these frames, we recorded the life cycle demographics. So as I mentioned, for 4 treatments, and then we looked at all of these life cycle stages you see here in green. So what we did is we created a life cycle model using our observations from the field. So first, to characterize emergence, we simply counted the emerged seedlings in the spring and the fall. And then we sample from this distribution so that we get variation every time instead of taking an average number. Then to look at the seedling survival, we translated our seedling counts to a seedling volume using a percent cover estimate. So essentially by estimating the plant percent cover, you then multiply it by an average plant height, and you can have a cylindrical volume for the annual wheatgrass and other species. And using this volume, we no longer had to count each and every seedling as the plants grew more dense. Using plant volume, we can then create a regression to predict the number of spikelets, as well as the seeds per spikelet, once again sampling from a distribution of the ranges. And then we looked at seed rain. We're still in the process of doing this, but you can see from our other treatments, we have frames where annual wheatgrass was not originally found, and we'll look at the rates of how annual wheatgrass moved into these plots, as well as you see this bison lake here. There's a lot of grazing animals in the area, as I mentioned, and you can see this little annual wheatgrass spikelet lodged into the fur, and we know that animal movement is one of the major vectors for this. And lastly, to look at seed survival, we conducted a seed burial experiment, and after 1 year of burial, we found that seeds were between 12 and 8% viable, which is compared to without a burial around the 20% range, so it's still highly competitive. So once we characterized our model, we came up with these predictions. So this is a 10-year simulated period, and you can see we have our open top chamber here in yellow, and our turquoise is our control. And what we're predicting is the seed bank density over a 10-year period. And you can see here that by year 5, we see about a 45% increase in our open top chamber seed bank density, whereas only about a 9% increase in the control. Same after 10 years, we see about a 47% increase with our elevated CO2 and temp, and only a 9% increase with our control. Using these results, we were able to bootstrap probabilities that after a 5-year, we would expect about a 0.9 probability that our open top chamber would have a greater seed bank density than our control. And after year 10, about a 0.98 probability. In addition, we looked at all of the neighboring species in our sampling area. We created a rank abundance curve, and you can see that by far, annual wheatgrass is dominating our plant community, followed by desert alyssum. Using a linear regression, we found that annual wheatgrass is negatively associated with 3 of our other neighboring species, indicating just another management concern of its presence in the Gardner Basin. So the last twist to our story is that in the fall of 2019, Yellowstone National Park decided to implement a prescribed burn within our grazing exclosure. You can see from the photo that it was a very low intensity burn, which created this mosaic pattern. And this was very interesting because it was able to harvest seeds from both the burned patches and the non-burn patches and see how the seeds responded. And you can see from a preliminary germination test, the seeds that weren't burned germinated fairly normally, and the ones that did burn didn't germinate at all. So I followed up with a tetrazolium test, and I found that with the not burned seeds, we have a 27% viability rate, whereas the burned seeds, there were 0% viable. So I also surveyed the percent cover of annual wheatgrass before and after the burn. You can see here in fall 2019, before the burn, made a very high percent of annual wheatgrass cover. Following the burn in the spring, you can see it drastically reduced the cover. However, in the summer, post-burn, annual wheatgrass recovered back to around the 50% range. If you compare this summer post-burn to plots that were never burned, you can see that they are fairly close. So we wanted to translate these results for managers to be able to inform decision-making. And the best way we know to do this is to use probability. Basically, we wanted to see what is the probability of annual wheatgrass cover being higher if we never burned compared to our post-burn treatments. And you can see here in the first bar, the probability is very high that if we don't burn, the cover is higher. And that goes also following the spring and summer of post-burn. However, you can see that our summer 2020 no burn compared to a summer 20 post-burn is about the 0.6 probability, meaning that it might be worth burning. However, annual wheatgrass is capable of recovering after about a 6-month period. So in conclusion, we know that temperatures are increasing in the Gardner Basin and are projected to continue increasing. We've also found that at elevated temperatures, we predict a greater seed bank density in annual wheatgrass. We also find that annual wheatgrass is negatively associated with many of its neighboring species, indicating these management concerns are valid. We have also found that prescribed burning may be a viable management approach, but we need to know more about how annual wheatgrass will continue to recover following the fire. So I would really like to thank the National Park Service employees, Roy Rankin and John Klaptowski, for their collaboration, as well as guidance from my advisor, Bruce Maxwell, and for all of my lab mates for their help in the field. Thank you for your time.